everyone, and welcome to Survive This Crit, where Kylie and I combine our love for horror movies and RPGs to answer that all-important question we all ponder. Could you survive this horror movie? This episode, we discuss and go deep into our discussion of our next movie, Silence of the Lambs.
I'm your host, Nick. And with me, as always, is my co-host.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kylie. Thanks for tuning in. All right. We are back in another episode, another film. This one is Silence of the Lambs. So I think I should just get right into it. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
So this film is a bit different than the slasher films that we have done in the past. This film was budgeted $19 million, so quite a bit more expensive to make than the past films that we've talked about. But it grossed $272.7 million worldwide. In fact, it became the fifth highest grossing film of 1991. Do you have a guess on any of the others? I can read them off if that would be easier.
Yeah, let's just go with that.
Okay.
After my embarrassing trivia lack of knowledge last time, let's go with it.
Fair. I mean, you're going to kick my butt in trivia this week, I have a feeling. The others in the top 5 for the highest grossing films of 1991 were Terminator 2, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Beauty and the Beast, and Hook. So, and then right at the bottom of that, Silence of the Lambs. It was released February 14th, 1991 on Valentine's Day.
I know, I saw that yesterday when I was looking at the documentary. I was like, big mistake. And then I remembered Bloody Valentine came out that on Valentine's Day as well, a different year. And so did Deadpool. And I was like, you know what? Maybe it wasn't a big mistake.
Bloody Valentine, though, is at least like love horror themed. It has Valentine in the name. But this ended up being a great marketing move for whatever reason for this film because it won 5 Oscars that year in 1992.
Oh my goodness, you're right. Yeah.
It won Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, Best Writing of a Screenplay based on previous material, and it was also nominated for Best Sound and Best Editing. And basically every other award show that happened that following year, they were nominated and won for Best Direction, Best Actor, Best Actress, and won a ton of screenplay awards as well. So they were pretty impressive. This film, though, was distributed by Orion, which is now owned by Amazon through MGM. Orion Films, before they were acquired by Amazon and MGM, they did the RoboCop films as an example of some of their other work. But the 1990s were the era of more psychological horror films. Although today, I feel like most people wouldn't consider Silence of the Lambs to be a horror film. They would probably consider it more true crime drama. However, in the 90s, it was definitely considered a horror film. In the 1990s, brought a lot of other psychological horror films like The Sixth Sense, Amityville, and so many more. We really stepped out of the slasher era and dove into psychological horror. So,
and I see what you mean a bit with the point you're making there. Because I would bring it up to some people who, are about 20, 30 years older than me. Just saying like, oh yeah, I'm going to watch Silence of the Lambs pretty soon. And they all looked at me in shock. Like, you're going to watch that. I wouldn't even, I don't have the guts to watch it. It's too frightening. And then I did watch it and I was like, this wasn't that bad.
Yeah, it's because it's all psychological horror. It's not super flashy like Friday the 13th or super gory like Nightmare on Elm Street. It really is just psychologically horrifying.
Maybe it just doesn't faze us because we're both just insane.
That is quite possible. Maybe we are like Hannibal, the cannibal.
Maybe. Well, I'm not as smart, but
are you saying
maybe.
You eat flesh?
Only the flesh of other animals.
Humans are considered animals.
They're considered the most dangerous game.
All right, Nick has maybe revealed something new about himself. Could you guess what the Rotten Tomato score was for this film?
Here we go. I'm gonna give it 91%.
You're getting so much better at this. I cannot even explain. It actually, so it had a 95% by both audience and critic reviewers. So
Dang
you
it.
did it. You were really close. What about Letterboxd?
Letterbox? Okay, so that's out of 5. I'm gonna say 4.8. If not,
4.8.
then 5. No,
That's
4.8. 4.8.
that's a little high. You were close. 4.3.
What?
Well, so remember,
People on
this is how it stands up to modern audiences. And there are stuff with Buffalo Bill, as we'll go into, that is definitely seen as more problematic today. But it was seen by critics and stuff like that in the 90s as like, this is an amazing movie. But some
This
of
is
the
why
reviews,
I identify more with the older generation. Kids these days, they don't know
kids
what
these
art
days.
is.
A couple of the reviews, Izzy said, the scariest thing in this film is a close-up shot of a nipple ring. God, that goes through me. This is the peak of the horror genre. And another review was written in by Holly. It says, quote, I'm having an old friend for dinner is one of the best final lines in film history, which I agree. That was a brilliant line. And the final note on just our introduction to this film is that the American Film Institute ranked Hannibal Lecter as the #1 best movie villain on AFI's 100-year anniversary back in 2003. So back in 2003, they made a list of the top 50 movie villains in the past 100 years, and Hannibal Lecter was #1.
Here's a quick question for you, Kylie. So, have you watched the recent? I know it's already like a couple years old, but the more recent revival series on Netflix for
Clarice?
Lecter.
No,
What?
I've not seen the series. I actually, when the series was first being picked up, I actually, when I was working one of my talent management jobs, was looking through our talent management pool to see who we could submit for that pilot. So,
Oh,
and I think because of COVID, it ended up getting delayed and made a little bit later. But yeah, I remember hearing about it coming out and actively in my job trying to assist the person I was working for to see if we could find someone in our talent pool who would be a good fit for that role. But have you seen
so
it?
I've seen a few episodes. So I was just gonna ask you who you thought played the role of Hannibal Lecter better, whether it was Anthony Hopkins or Mads Mikkelsen.
I'm not familiar with who that guy is, unfortunately, nor have I seen it, so I can't really give an honest opinion. I'm the one though that always roots for the original over a remake. So that's just me, but you said you've seen a few episodes. How do you think their performances compare?
So the tough thing is that they both do a really good job. I mean, I love Anthony Hopkins and how he portrays it. He does a really good job at being that uh, intellectual, compassionate, yet still horrifying person. And I feel like Mads also does a similar job as well. Just seeing that side of the character, Dr. Lecter, who uh, we see him as this calm, collected person who's actually quite helpful. I, if I had to pick one over the other, I'd probably go with Mads Mikkelsen version, though, only because we get to see how he prepares a meal. Like there's quite a few episodes where you see him being like just playing some classical music, and he's just with such precision and skill carving up a human organ and then flambeing it or perfectly searing it and preparing this eloquent feast for a bunch of guests who don't know that they're actually eating a human being.
Dang. So would
And
you say if Anthony Hopkins had a scene like that, I haven't seen the sequel Hannibal, but if Anthony Hopkins had a scene like that in this film, outside of the biting someone's face, do you think you would have felt the same way? Like you would have been like, oh, because of this particular scene and action he's doing, I prefer Anthony Hopkins.
possibly, I mean, we can't say for sure since, such a thing does not exist.
Mhm.
But I do just looking at a picture of Mads right now, um, I would say I'd probably still go for his version only because he kind of gives off that more uh, high class, elegant look.
Mm.
Whereas Anthony Hopkins, well, he still does a very good job of portraying this role with the slick back hair and everything. He he doesn't give off that perception of being someone with um, what is it? Who basically doesn't look much different from the common man. Is
Mm.
uh, better compared to the Mickelson version,
Interesting.
if that all makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So for you, it comes down to how they physically look rather than the
Yeah,
acting itself. Well,
yeah.
that should bring us
If Sir
into.
Anthony Hopkins is listening, sir, your portrayal is great. No notes. I loved it. I'm just I like the Mickelson version a little bit better. That's all. It's
All
like a
right.
tiny sliver.
That would bring us into our thoughts and opinions. What were your opinions on this film, not the series that came 20 years later?
So I really like the film, but I do have to add on that I feel like I didn't quite get the right exposure to the movie as I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to. I have to confess that I watched the film just last week and I wasn't quite feeling well as I was watching the film. So I actually fell asleep multiple times and had to rewatch the movie like 3 times in a row,
Nick,
starting
are you
over.
even a horror fan? Who are you?
I was a horror fan. I am a horror fan. I was just a horror fan with a terrible migraine.
Ugh, I understand. I get migraines too, but how dare you?
So basically, a 2-hour movie took me 4 to 5 hours to watch.
Well,
But
do you have any other like strong opinions about how it was done?
um, no, I would say all around good film.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very good job of uh, setting out to accomplish what the casting crew said was one of their big goals, which was portraying a strong feminist character,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think is something that's not as well done nowadays, personally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just I have no complaints really. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat. Besides the parts where I was sleeping, obviously, I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, just thinking like, what's going to happen next? What's Dr. Lecter's next move?
Yeah. All right. I mean, as for my thoughts and opinions, this feels like a slow burn of a film. It feels more true crime in what we'd call like in the 2020s era that we are now. But in the 90s, it really is psychological horror. And like the second and third act, the pace really picks up, which I really enjoyed. I think it's because I have a very short attention span, but it does feel like a slow burn, but the payoff really is worth it. They do a great job with the payoff at the end. A couple notes that I had, like the acting was amazing. Oh my gosh. The acting was so beautiful and just horrifying. I love that they never were pushing or overacting because it's very easy for characters who are clinically insane to just be like really crazy and doing too much and pushing. But I loved how the choice for Anthony Hopkins' character, and as it was written in the book, that he's very like you can have a conversation with him. And I loved how Jodie Foster, with her character too, in times of crisis or pressure, she never let her emotions get the best of her, or if she did, she found a way to overcome it. And it was really beautiful to watch on screen. And then the other note that I had was just the camera style was really cool. There was so many close-ups, but those were very jarring to watch because you can see so much calculation and mental chess happening between the characters by the camera being all up in our grill, basically. And
was it especially with having quite a few scenes where it's literally just two characters talking to each other through a wall, having the different angles going on, and even seeing the one character head on while also getting a focus in on the reflection of the other character, stuff like that, just to add a sense of drama to it, was actually quite attention grabbing.
Yeah. Well, and I did some research too on the cinematographer on that, and they really did that. And the director really chose that choice as well because they wanted to establish power. So based on if the characters are looking at the camera or they're looking to the side, that really kind of is talking about who's in power at that moment, as well as the camera is really showing Clarice's point of view. So you can see when she's in a room full of men, how the men are looking down at her when the camera pans around until it gets back to her as she is observing different things. I thought that was a really unique choice. And I think that makes the film theme of feminism even stronger because you get to see her point of view and then you get to watch her react to that.
That was something I didn't exactly notice the first time watching through the movie, and then it was actually pointed out to me. And then I really started to notice it, especially like the scene where she walks into an elevator and it's a bunch of other guys who are at least a foot taller than her, seeing all those guys towering over her, and yeah, I could definitely believe that she would still be projecting herself with that correct and strong posture, trying to control the room even there.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very impressive.
I think it did a great job honoring that theme of feminism for sure.
Let's go into our next segment here.
Monster movie trivia. Dun, dun.
Exactly. That'll be our new intro song for that segment. Okay. So for those of you who haven't heard this segment before, I have come in with 10 difficult, challenging trivia questions for Kylie here. And she has to get at least seven of them correct. For every one that she gets wrong, she is slashed. 3 slashes, and she is dead.
I really took you through the ringer last time we played this, so I really don't expect to make it out alive.
Well, I tried to scale it to what I perceived to be your level. So I added in a couple ones I felt were lobs, and then some that I thought were like, okay, these ones will be interesting for Kylie. So let's see how this goes. All right. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Question 1. What year was this movie released?
1991.
Perfect. Okay, that's the baseline.
Who originally owned the film rights to this movie?
Oh, shoot. Because Orion acquired it after. Was it Paramount?
No, it was a specific individual. And so I will admit to a couple sources kind of conflicting with each other a little bit on it, but they all agree that this guy took charge, at least, on the rights of the project.
Okay, they took charge on this film.
Yes.
That was made, or they had the rights and then they ended up not making it?
The latter. Let's go with the latter.
So they had the rights and didn't make it. Oh gosh. I have no idea. You can stab me. You can slash me. I have no idea who this person is.
All right. Well, first off, let me just get the answer out there. So the answer is Gene Hackman.
Oh, son of a... That is one of the producers of Orion, and then he had to step out. I should have guessed that. Son of a...
So that was the part that was a little confusing to me, only because I did notice that the first article I read from Empire Online just talked about Gene Hackman, and then it mentioned about selling the rights to Orion. But then in other sources, I saw Orion actually had it, but Gene was the one who started the lead on the project. Either way,
Yeah.
sorry,
Either way, I
Kylie.
should have
You've
said Gene
been
Hackman because I know he was part of Orion, and you can stab me. You can slash me.
Third question. Which killers inspired the idea of Buffalo Bill?
Ted Bundy,
Mm-hmm.
Ed Gein,
Mm-hmm.
Gary Heidnick. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the last name right, but it's Gary Hyde something.
You are correct on that. Congratulations.
Hallelujah. Okay.
All right. Who was originally selected to play the role of Clarice?
I know Michelle Pfeiffer was one of the women up for it. Laura Dern was up for it as well. And Meg Ryan.
Okay, so you got to pick one of those three. What's your answer going to be?
Michelle Pfeiffer.
That's correct.
Yes.
So Michelle's actually all set to be in the film. They tapped her and everything. And then she backed out last minute. She thought that it was too violent.
Whoa, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Okay. All right. Look at you with your micro deep dive. I love it.
Yep. Let's see. Who did Tom Harris, the original author of the book Silence of the Lambs, base the character of Dr. Lecter on?
So when he was doing research for trials in Mexico, he interviewed the doctor who had healed and helped saved the prisoner that he was there to learn more about. And he got his inspiration from that doctor, which in the sources that I looked into, they didn't reveal his name. But
We got his name.
Oh, you got his name. But he
Yeah.
realized afterwards, after the prison guards let him out, they were like, sir, yeah, that's like a legit murderer. That's why he's there. And the author was so shocked because he just had a great conversation with this dude. And he was like, this guy is in here for murder. So that's what he based Hannibal off of.
But what was his name, Kylie?
I don't
Say
know.
the name.
I don't know. None of my sources had his name. I needed to give the name. I feel like I gave a great backstory.
You did, and we'll dive deeper into that later on because I got quite a bit of story on that.
I love
But
that.
here it is. Okay, you got to say a name.
I
Count to three.
have to
Otherwise,
say
that's
a
it.
name?
Otherwise,
I was so much more
you
merciful.
got till three. You got till three. Otherwise, it's a slash. 3, 2, 1.
Doctor.
So close.
Dr. Hannibal. Lecter.
No, that's even worse.
Can I get a half a slash? Because I knew his whole backstory.
Okay, I'll give you half a slash.
Okay.
Twice. And that's it. Okay. Let's see. What were Jodie Foster's 2 conditions that she came with for playing the role of Clarice?
Oh, golly gee, these are hard questions. I love that we made these much harder. I think that the theme of feminism really had to be strong for this film for her. And I believe also she really needed to get some real world experience. I know both of those facts are true, but I don't know if those were the conditions, so I'm just going with it.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh.
You're wrong.
What were the conditions?
So the first one, her condition was the FBI agents in the movie cannot be portrayed as goofy in any way. Reason being, so for those of you who don't know that much about the career of Jodie Foster, she starred in a movie in 1976 called Taxi Driver, which became the motivation for the individual who tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan later on. He was trying to impress her, actually, by doing so. So, as she grew up, was it many FBI agents would, you know, tail her around, try to basically protect her to make sure that this person or other people wouldn't approach her and put her life in danger in any way. So
Wow.
because of that, she had a lot of respect for the FBI. And so she insisted like the FBI cannot be made to look like goofballs. That would be she felt that would be a betrayal to the agency.
That's amazing. What was the second condition?
Her second condition was that there can only be small amounts of violence.
I feel like they
So,
did a great job honoring both of those requests in the film.
oh yeah, I would say they didn't focus too much on the bloodiness. I mean, obviously there was blood and gore and whatnot in this movie, but
It wasn't much, not compared to a lot of today's stuff.
Exactly. Okay, so
I have
since you had
half
a
of a life left.
you
I'm
have
not
half a
doing
life.
too well.
Okay. Let's see if I could find. Here we go. Okay, so let's try this one.
Okay.
See if this one's a little bit easier for you. What did Dr. Lecter eat with a man's liver?
Fava beans.
Fava beans. And what else?
In a bottle of Chianti. Glass of Chianti. Are you just doing the noise just now?
Yeah. You were correct.
Let's go.
Okay. Next question. What did Dr. Lecter use to break out of his handcuffs when was it in his second prison cell that he was in?
Is it the pen from Clarice? I feel like it's something so small. I honestly have a hard time identifying it. So I would be curious to know, because every time I've watched that movie, I'm like, I can't quite tell what that is. But I feel like it's a pen.
So I'll give that one to you. You're correct. It was the pen. To be more precise, it was the part of the pen with the tip and the cartridge. Yeah. When they brush fingers. And he expertly hides just that little piece of the pen in his mouth for a while.
Yeah.
And then cleverly uses some bit of cover and some sleight of hand to hide it. And then immediately breaks out of prison just using that. I thought it was so impressive. I was like, oh,
it was so good.
Skill.
It was so good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. So that puts us at just to keep track here. So we're at question number 8, I believe.
Whew.
Okay. What were the moths symbolic of in the film?
The moths were symbolic of the desire for James Gumb to like resurrect and become something new, to burst out of his cocoon. And for that, for his example, it was basically him becoming a woman.
I'll give that one to you. I just have it down as specifically change or transformation. It's the line that Dr. Lecter uses, outright saying, "Oh, moths, they are significant for the idea of transformation or change." So I'll give that one to you. You're still holding on.
I have a half a life and I'm holding on.
Okay. Next one. In which book was the character of Dr. Lecter first introduced?
I mean, there is a book called Silence of the Lambs that was written by the author about Dr. Hannibal Lecter. He wrote the stories basically in reverse chronological order. So the stories about his childhood and stuff came later. But is the book actually titled? It should be titled Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, it is titled Silence of the Lambs. That the book is based, or the movie is based off the book Silence of the Lambs. Yes. Is that your answer? Is that where?
Yes,
Dr.
it is my answer.
Kylie.
Am I wrong?
You're wrong. Silence of the Lambs is actually one in a series of books that Thomas Harris writes.
Yes, but
The
Thomas
first,
wrote Silence of the Lambs first.
no, he wrote Red Dragon first.
No.
Yep. Thomas Harris first wrote the character of Dr. Lecter in Red Dragon, which came out several years before Silence of the Lambs.
I'm dead. And I
I'm
was on my
sorry,
second
Kylie.
to last question. You can slash me. I'm ready.
This is your third and final slash. Kylie, sorry, but you are dead.
Do you want to read the last question though? Because I'm curious what else I could have gotten wrong.
Yes. So my last question I had written down here, which actually I believe we had gone through 10 questions, but I did come up with the backup questions just in case.
Okay.
But I do have one other question down here. You're right. That is, what was the budget for this movie?
19 million.
So close, 20 million.
Okay, that must be rounding up. I had 19 million in my notes, but okay, cool.
According to the documentary I found on YouTube, what was it? The number was like $20 million. So,
all right. We'll
margin
call
of
it
error,
20.
I'll give that one to you. But
Darn. All right. Well, now that I am dead, should we deep dive?
yes, let's. Let's start out with my section since it talks about the origins of the idea of Dr. Lecter. I feel like that makes the most sense to start out with.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, Dr. Hannibal Lecter was based off of a true life murderer whose name was Alfredo Trevino, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Oh.
I could be butchering it, but I hope that's correct. He also went by the name Dr. Salazar. So the way the story goes, Alfredo came from a wealthy family, and his father would constantly pressure him and his siblings to perform well, excel in school, whatnot. So he had that constant pressure on him. And then later on, he would become a doctor, and in the later on the 1950s was accused of being a homosexual, and he even had a few students, at least one student, that he had relationships with. And from here, there starts to become some controversy over what actually happened. There are a few different theories as to what this one-on-one interaction was, whether the student came forward with any type of threat against him or whether or not something else occurred. But basically, the conversation ended in that student's murder in his office, where he used sodium pentothal to knock him out and then dragged him into a bathroom and from there expertly cut him up, stuffed him into a box, and then transported him. He had another lover on the side, who this lover, without knowing what was in the box, helped him transport it to his aunt's house, where they buried it in the backyard. Basically, Dr. Trevino had told his other lover that it was chemical waste.
Oh my gosh.
But funny enough, he was immediately caught. The police found out about the murder and found the evidence the very next day. And the best part was that Dr. Trevino, he immediately confessed and even started to brag about his expert knifesman skills in cutting the victim.
Dang. Wow.
So
That's pretty amazing. That's a good deep dive right there.
yeah, and then I think it was maybe 18 months later, he was, I believe, he was in, indicted,
Indicted.
indicted for the crime.
Hmm.
Um, but then uh, it was found out just how skilled of a psychiatrist he was, and so he cut a deal, and basically he got to live the high life in prison while also working as the prison psychiatrist.
Oh my gosh,
And
just the irony of that.
that's how was it a later crime occurs in Mexico with a different mental patient.
Hmm.
Uh, they're accused of a crime that they said they did not commit, and basically Thomas Harris hears about it, takes a trip down to Mexico to investigate, since he was a journalist at the time, and that's how he gets the opportunity to interview. Uh, well, he believed his name was Dr. Salazar, but then later found out it was Dr. Trevino. And that's how he ended up, as you were saying earlier, totally surprised that this man with such high fashion sense and uh, a calm, cool, and charming person could actually be this crazy killer.
That's incredible. Wow. Okay. Well, do you want me to counter that with the inspiration of the James Gumb character?
Yeah, go for it. Let's hear it.
All right. So James Gumb was inspired as a combination of three different characters. And according to the people who really were criminologists at the time, they wanted to create a character that the public eye doesn't believe actually exists, but those who work in the criminology field, they know that that type of person exists. So this character was built off of three other serial killers. Ted Bundy, who is known for having a cast or crutches on to try to get help and sympathy from women, and then he would use the crutches or the cast as a weapon. Gary Heidmick, who was known for having a pit in his home where he would keep his victims, and Ed Gein, who was known for killing people, or he would dig up graves, and then he would use parts of their body and their skin as lampshades and stuff around the house. Yeah. And digging digging even deeper into that, Lecter says in the film that this character is quote unquote not transsexual, which was a different term in that date and time. But the director and the actor who played him specifically said that Buffalo Bill wasn't meant to be portrayed as gay nor transgender. And they felt like they had tried to emphasize it in the film, but they obviously expressed apologies that it wasn't emphasized enough. So in Levine's interpretation, who's the actor, Ted Levine, who played Buffalo Bill, his actor's interpretation was that Buffalo Bill was a sick homophobic man who was mocking gay and transgender people and trying on personas via women's skin, trying to get as far away from who he was as possible. And that's a direct quote from a Vanity Fair article. Jonathan Demme, who is the director, his thoughts on the character, which this is also another direct quote, was that Buffalo Bill wasn't a gay character. He was a tormented man who hated himself and wished he was a woman, because that would make him as far from himself as he possibly could be. The film was protested by the LGBTQ group Queer Nation at the 1992 Oscars because of it. They didn't like seeing a transgender person as the villain in a horror film. And there's a lot more about how gender and sexuality are represented in this film in the Vanity Fair article that I researched. It's a pretty lengthy article, and they include a lot of really interesting perspectives from the criminology perspective, as well as film professors today. So we'll make sure to link that in the show notes for those of you who are more curious on the deep dive of that specifically. But the actor, how he prepared was he did a ton of intense research on serial killers to understand the role. And he also went to a variety of drag clubs because he wanted to talk to the performers and understand their approach and talk to them and try to explain to them that he was not trying to play a homophobic character, but he wanted to understand why these people did drag, and he wanted just to have an authentic representation because he wasn't somebody who is a part of that group as identifying in his sexuality. But what was really interesting was the scene that is him dancing, that was entirely unscripted. So they decided on the day they needed to create a more vulnerable scene for this character. And he took some shots of tequila and did it. And the producer for this really thought that that was like the most courageous scene that he did, because it shows the psychology and the pain that this character has.
Yeah, that's definitely the scene in the film that probably made me the most uncomfortable. I was like, I was surprised that it wasn't as censored as it uh, as it should have been. But
Yeah.
you know, those are my feelings on it.
Well, what do you want to dive into next? What do you have? I have some more stuff on the actors and direction and cinematography, but I'd like to hear what you have as well.
I do have a little bit more on the origin of the film.
Okay.
So Gene Hackman had the original rights to this movie.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? He's detailed as, or was it? He was interviewed saying that he read the book, and as he was reading the book, tearing through the pages, he could immediately picture every scene in this movie, and so he was very excited about it. So he begins to work on it, starting to build up ideas for a cast, and um, then 1989 rolls around.
Mm-hmm.
There's some initial work done on the film, I believe, but the Oscars came in March that year, and he had a movie out for nomination called Mississippi Burning,
Mm-hmm.
where he did kind of a similar role as an FBI agent, and he didn't win anything. And after that, he was kind of discouraged. He lost faith in the project, and then Orion Pictures took full property over it and handed it over to Jonathan Demme, or Dem or Demi,
I think it's Demi.
was it?
I also read that Gene Hackman originally wanted to direct and play the role of Dr. Lecter. And I think the final tipping point for him too was he also dropped out because his daughter didn't like how violent it was.
Yeah, that seemed to be a common theme with a lot of people, or a common thought was that the film was going to be way too violent, and so they wanted to drop out of the project.
Yeah, which they did a great job of honoring the story and not just making it ruthlessly violent without reason. I think that's why the violence is so jarring in this film, is because it's not very often. But when you see it, you remember it.
Mhm.
Which brings me to a couple points about the production designer, Christy Zia. So she helped design a lot of the specifics. For example, when the police officer is strung up after Hannibal makes his escape, she's the one who did that. She chose to do it with an American flag stringing him up because she decided that red, white, and blue is a really strong color theme in this film because it represents the American dream. And it was the point of it was to make sure all these images that looked like they were safe images to show that they weren't safe. So, for example, the American flag is also on the hood of the car in the storage unit before Clarice finds the body. So it's to show that all these areas that look like they should be safe, like the cage that was supposed to hold Hannibal, it clearly wasn't because there is a body. And Christy Zia also said that the book was super specific on what Buffalo Bill's house looked like how it was very bland on the surface, but a whole life lurking underneath. And
yeah, they basically used the book to create an entire map for the set of his basement, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a production designer, she was like, this film is really creepy. She didn't want to be a part of it. She was on the similar boat as a lot of the women in this film. But Demi convinced her to join because of the feminist themes of the film. A couple of the other notes that I have as part of the more gory stuff, getting that out of the way, Ray Mendez, it had the role of Moth Wrangler. Yes, they used real moths in the film. But the throat shot was really interesting how they did that, where they removed the cocoon. So
yeah. So that wasn't actually that wasn't a real moth, but that was I heard it was gummy bears mixed with.
Tootsie
Do you
Rolls.
remember Tootsie Rolls? And I thought that was so gross. Either way,
I thought
just
that was really cool though, because that way it's safe and edible if need be. And it was stuffed with saffron, oregano, and KY jelly. That way when you cut into it, it still foams and looks really cool, but it's completely edible. And if
oh,
you
and
can
then since we're talking about that scene, did you hear about did you hear about the last breath that was talked about, or yeah, the last breath from the corpse in that scene? So if you watch that scene again, as they take the cocoon out of the victim's mouth, you start to hear like one final breath come out, and they're like, oh, that it's like this last breath that was kind of just like held in by the cocoon. And they decided to do that in
Ooh.
post editing later on. They thought it was just kind of cool to include that.
That's such a cool choice to include, because then you can really picture that the whole gruesome scene going down without seeing the violence of him shoving the cocoon down her throat. By context clues, you know exactly what's happening. Do you want to dive into the actors a little bit?
Yes, yeah, let's do that.
Cool. So, as for the actors, they had big names from the get go. Like Jodie Foster had just been nominated for an Oscar or won an Oscar the year before. So, she was like a hot button character to get. She worked with real FBI agents for this role, and she spent a lot of
Yeah, over in
time
Quantico, right?
over in Quantico, which
Oh,
is fairly close to where I am.
ah, cool.
And Anthony Hopkins, he, ironically, on the other end, he did no research on the role,
Oh yeah,
which is
he
amazing. Like, he plays it so well, but he did not, like, he saw that his character was influenced by Truman Capote, Katharine Hepburn, and Hal the Computer from the 2001 Space Odyssey, which is
yeah, I remember
fascinating. He didn't
hearing about that.
study serial killers like everybody else did.
No, he read the role and he immediately knew exactly what he wanted to do with this character, which I thought
Yeah,
was kind of cool and interesting. I thought that kind of it only portrays how much skill he had as an actor.
absolutely. Well, and the hissing that he does that's very snake-like. That is said to be inspired by animal work, which is an actual part of a course I took in college, gained my theater degree, where you study animals and you see what, like, based on their physical movements and their bodies and what they do with their sounds, that you can learn from them. Constance Wu references it in her book, Making a Scene, and she references Anthony Hopkins specifically for his hissing noise because it's very snake-like. You can't really interpret it as anything else. And Anthony Hopkins added that in because he was so minimal and like stoic with everything he said, but probing. And then at the end of one of his takes, he added that in. And Jonathan Demme was like, no, we're keeping that. That was amazing. Because he added it in more to get it out of his system, not to like actually have it make the cut. He added it as like a little gag. But Jonathan Demme was like, no, that was amazing. We're keeping that for sure.
Yeah,
Which,
and based off of my research, it seems like probably the MVP of this movie was definitely Jonathan Demme, and in the sense that he brought a lightheartedness to the film. He was very good at rallying his crew, and he brought that fun to the work.
yeah. Well, the energy on set was described as having a lot of fun games and pranks. That was like the norm. And like Brooke Smith, who played Catherine Martin, the senator's daughter, she said that like even Anthony Hopkins would approach her in character and bring her like flowers or chocolates just to mess with her. And even the crew made a board game out of the blueprint of Buffalo Bill's house called Gum's Game, where the objective was to save Catherine. Like there was a lot of fun that was happening on that set. I will say, so Ted and Jodie didn't talk a whole lot during filming. And Clarice, I mean, Jodie and Anthony didn't talk a whole lot either, except like in between takes and stuff. Whereas in the end of the film, Jodie and Anthony admitted to each other, they were like, I was scared of you. And Anthony was like, no, I was scared of you. because they were so focused on just fine-tuning their craft. So I think that was a really cool balance where they kept some professional boundaries, but the energy was still really light and enjoyable. And I think it takes a really talented director to maintain that sort of energy, to respect the actors who want to be more method and want to not communicate with their co-stars in between stuff, but also to keep the environment enjoyable for other people. I think the only way that would have been possible is with a great director, like I said. So a little bit about Jonathan Demme. He signed on because he was intrigued by an unusual story. I mean, think about the timeline of this. We're coming out of the end of the slasher era, and we're jumping into something totally psychological here. He previously worked on a lot of B-list directorial films, but he also did music videos, TV shows, and more throughout the years. He unfortunately did pass away in 2017. But his point of view of this film was that it was a story about one person desperately trying to save the life of another. But the timing of this film was absolutely incredible because it was the peak of serial murder in the US. And it was the end of the film slasher era. So Silence of the Lambs came out 2 years after Ted Bundy was executed and 5 months before Jeffrey Dahmer was apprehended. So that makes Lecter and Buffalo Bill much less like characters, but like real people that we could see in real life.
Yeah, and what was it? I have a list here of Jonathan Demme's previous work, just a few of his films.
Yeah.
Married to the Mob, Swimming to Cambodia, Stop Making Sense, and Caged Heat, all of which none of them were really seen, except maybe Caged Heat, were seen as anything that was relatable to the film of Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
So people thought it was a weird choice to make him the director of this movie, but he came out saying that he was still passionate about this project. He obviously, like you said, he had that interesting perspective on it, which I think is a great way to approach any horror movie, as finding the hero in the story and making it about that. But the other part being that he talked about, of course, he wanted to work on the movie because he believes that it's every director's dream to write a movie that scares the crud out of people.
I agree with that. And I think another person who worked really well with Jonathan Demme was Tak Fujimoto, the cinematographer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They were supposed to be like a great team from what I heard.
Yeah, I saw some behind the scenes photos and clips, and they worked really well together. They were very creative on the fly, just being very inventive. And I feel like the idea of Jonathan Demme's vision of one person desperately trying to save the life of another really shows through the camera work as well, especially in the power that we see Clarice's perspective throughout the whole film. Tak did a great job of that. And he also worked on The Sixth Sense and Star Wars A New Hope, in addition to
Really?
many other films. Yeah, he has a really diverse resume of creating some amazing horror films as well as Star Wars of all things.
Yeah, after that movie, I would put him on anything, no questions asked.
Yeah, right? The camera work is amazing in that. And I remember one of the editors in one of the documentaries I watched saying these are all close-ups. But then the more he watched it, he's like, this is amazing. They may be all close-ups, but it was the right choice to do a lot of close-ups in this film. But did you want to learn about the film cover and the Buffalo Bill house?
Yeah, what do you got? Let's hear it.
So the film cover, as we know, predominantly features Clarice's face with the death head moth over the mouth. But if you look closer, the skull of the mouth is actually based on Salvador Dali's painting In Vultibus Mors, Voluptuous Death, which is actually a skull created by naked women.
Oh, okay. I saw glimpses of that, and I didn't realize that was the actual image on the movie cover. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear that.
Well, I
So
think it ties into the theme of femininity and even the theme that Buffalo Bill had of his desperation to transform and change so much better just by knowing that minute detail.
So I personally thought like this was a great movie for feminism, a great example of it, because I don't know. I feel like nowadays the stereotype is that feminism, in a lot of movies at least, is very heavy-handed and just not received well. Um, and so to have it more like this, where everything's more subtle, it's nothing is necessarily said outright, but it's in the way you see everything. I feel like that's a good way to portray it, as letting women show their strength in non explicit ways, in subtle manners, rather than treating the audience like we're all idiots and having to outright just say it so the message is clear to everybody.
Yeah, I think there is a theme in film today, not just with feminist films, but I think in most thematic things, that we come across films more and more often now that don't make us think. And I think this is a great example of one that, it, like you said, it doesn't just shove the theme in our face, but we get to watch and we get to be immersed in the theme. And I'm a really big fans of films that give you the time and the space to process and think, and it allows you to explore a topic with curiosity rather than shoving it down your throat like a moth cocoon. There is actual Buffalo Bill house that you can visit.
So what I'm hearing is we have a trip that we have to make.
We have a trip to take to Pennsylvania. So this house was purchased by a fan in 2021, and it was turned into a vacation rental and tourist attraction site. So the fan that bought this house is named Chris Ronan, who's a production designer for film and commercials. So he recreated the home to look like the film as much as possible. Like, yes, there is a pit and there's all this stuff, but can you guess who the fake well was designed by? It is designed by one of our favorite production special effects designers that we've talked about on this podcast.
You mean none other than my man, what was his name?
Tom Savini from Friday the 13th.
Oh, my bad. I was thinking the other person.
You're thinking of Tazo, huh?
Tazo, which I was having difficulty with.
They work together.
No. I was just having difficulty because the only thing that came to mind was Ted Lasso, and I was like, that's not it.
That's how you know we've been recording for too long.
Exactly.
But yes.
Savini, oh my goodness, that's great. I love it. So, perfect. I was going to say, so yeah, we have to make a trip, and then we have to reenact our eventual RPG episode.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. So for those audience members that don't remember who Tom Savini is, he is part of the special effects and choreography team who did the original Friday the 13th and is the one that basically made it worth watching. But yes, the Buffalo Bill house, we will link it in the show notes and we'll link a lot of our sources too for those who want to do deeper dives into specific things. But yes, we are going to be planning a trip to the Buffalo Bill house. Who wants to come?
Everyone, thank you for listening. And we just want to say, please leave a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or follow us on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and meet us at the Buffalo Bill house. All right, peace out.